Hello, and welcome back to Crew Parlay. This is a show where, well, this is my job, and as a thank you for supporting what I'm doing for a living, anyone who supports me for any amount of money on any platform monthly gets to participate in this sort of a rapid fire group parlay, a bunch of different takes on one topic. This one's topic is motivations for parlay. Why you doing this? Now, I just want to clarify something. I get to talk for a second with this up because this is my prompt to all of you. And this can kind of be a reverse parlay a little bit. It's like I'm asking all of you something and then you type a thing, but then I respond to the response you responded to my. Anyway, I can think of plenty of reasons to do this thing. That's why it's my business. Like, just to clarify, I'm just curious what people's specific reasons are. It's not at all challenging for me to think of many, many reasons why I would do this, but it's not offered. There just aren't people offering it. I said snarkily in the little prompt for this topic that the most likely reason why you would get parlay is because I'm the only one who sells it. There might be something similar somewhere. But a lot of it is, well, also, if you want to ask me, well, this is the one thing that I sell that lets you do that thing. There's actually a lot of different ways I provide parlay, but anyway, in some sense, it is a unique product, you could say. One of the reasons I have a lot of confidence in parlay as a system is that it's a unique-ish product. Again, there's not a bunch of readily available ways to get basically a custom mini podcast, especially not at this price point. I'm also confident in it because I am uniquely qualified to do it. And how am I qualified? Well, I don't know anything about anything. I'm qualified because I find it quite natural to talk in this way. It's very easy for me to do a lot of them. And so when you run the numbers, yada, 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 it works out from a business perspective. So these will be reasons. I'm sure nobody said that reason, of course. And so these will be the reasons other than that reason why you might choose to use parlay. So again, obviously, also this isn't. I worried that this one sounds too much like an ad. I think the fun of this one is that when seeing other people's parlay video submissions, because of course most people watching parlay don't pay for it. Actually, it's pretty even, but a lot of people watching parlay, dozens of people who watch parlay all the time, don't have it. I think it's interesting to consider why the person asked that question. You might find it interesting for me. I know personally, I often focus a lot on what kinds of things I'm asked that are interesting in what ways, what brings out good things in me, how self-centered. But that is what I often think about because I'm me. It's surprised people are somewhat self-centered. But it's really interesting to consider why that question was asked. A lot of the time, I feel like it's obvious. I don't know if it is for other folks. So, and maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I think it's obvious, but it's actually a different reason. Let's find out. Beginning with Lord Rusty, who says, I have two main motivations for submitting parlay. The first is to use it as a way to force myself to write. That's a very unexpected one to start on. I'm currently in the process of writing my first 5th edition Dungeons and Dragons supplement. All things going well, I'm publishing it within the year. Congratulations, I hope it goes well. And about 60% of the content got its first draft in parlay. A lot of the stuff I wrote for homebrew reviews hit the cutting room floor, but 90% of creative something is just forcing yourself to be creative and then editing heavily later. I strongly agree. If you have ever had any difficulty on any creative endeavor, this is not the only problem, but I would say, yeah, like 90% of the issue is you needed to just make a thing and you stopped yourself because it seemed bad. It was bad, but editing is more powerful than people give it credit for. Cutting is a very powerful technique in editing. Don't feel like you need to worry that significant amounts of the thing you made were bad. It's okay because you can just remove that stuff. And a shocking amount of things I've made in the past get dramatically better if you just remove like 30% of what's in there. It's amazing how transformative just deleting stuff that you made can be. Anyway, The other thing Lord Rusty uses it for is to focus your thoughts. I'm a postman in my day job, so I have about 4 hours a day with which to kind of let my brain go loose and contemplate stuff. Having one video prompt a month pushes me to pull the more interesting thoughts I hit this way into a form of legibility rather than letting them be forgotten. Interesting, like a form of clerical work for your thoughts. There's this magic card from Future Sight that I always sticks in my mind when I think about Parley or like that specific thing, managing your ideas and getting everything down. It's this homunculus, an artificial being, and in Magic the Gathering, homunculi are generally these big single eye thingies that are mostly a bit of a blob. There's other different looking homunculi, but they often have very prominent eyes. I guess not always one eye. And this homunculus is just sitting there next to, whoever created it in the art. And the flavor text says something to the effect of, a good homunculus grooms its master's mind, removing all the stray thoughts. I think implying to prevent madness while studying the arcane. But such a thing would be very useful in real life. It's hard to organize a lot of self-introspection. And most humans in our current civilization do not spend a lot of time introspecting, so there isn't much of a need to organize those thoughts. But if you do spend a lot of time introspecting, and that's probably a lot of the target audience for these videos, I can certainly relate to the need to find a way to organize that stuff, to not lose those thoughts. And I do think one of the great downfalls of humanity is that we're not amazing at learning from our mistakes or from our thoughts. We're, for a few reasons. Like most people, almost everyone is not very good at following up on like a failed attempt the next time. It's just hard. It's not that any of us are so stupid or anything. That just is challenging. Generally, what you'd want to solve is something that, from a natural perspective, you would be in the habit of doing it the wrong way your whole life. So it's challenging to just do it better that next time. But it can often be frustrating when you know what's wrong the first time you do it wrong, but you can't get yourself to do it not that way the next time. Again, speaking from my experience, maybe some of you are very good at this, in which case that's probably going very well for you, because I feel like that's a huge problem in life. Anyway, and getting to write this stuff down and kind of come back to your past self is a big thing. So that's interesting. That's it makes sense, but indeed, I was wrong already from, I think, at the beginning of this parlay. I definitely didn't see that coming as like a way to organize thoughts, but it makes sense. The forcing yourself to write thing is cool too. I think your point about actually getting pen to paper, that kind of thing, creatively is a good point. But it's also interesting to consider how, when you do this, when you submit parlay, you are making your idea somewhat vulnerable. I do have kind of a track on people who are commissioning parlay. You have to be a lot of things to do that. And so offering lower stakes places to do parlay, kind of like this, is a productive thing to do, because not everybody is willing to say, hey, I have a thing, I'm going to impose my thing on the world. I think this is fine. This is just what you do when you make things in the world. But it is intimidating, and a lot of people just, deep down, they just kind of don't believe in their own thing. They don't believe that their thing deserves to be the focus or has merit, I guess. A lot of people believe more strongly in, I guess, the larger world around them, the social contract, sort of, the thing that's assumed to be a good way to do things. But if you look around, I don't know how to tell you this, but like the world is a complete disorganized mess that makes no sense. And so if you are a person who doesn't have faith in your own vision, like, look, it's probably not that good, but neither is anyone else. It's not like, oh, it's great, people will love it. No, like maybe they won't. But the thing is, it's not going to be worse than this garbage. Like, come on. Have a little faith. So I have a lot of respect for those of you that say, like, look, I'm doing a parlay on this thing. It's not perfectly organized. Big deal. Like, he's not even going to script the response anyway. He's just going to sit down and read it, do his best. That's what I'm doing. we're on the same page. That's something I like about Parlay, is that I do think this is a relatively equal medium. We get in some way there's a respect to the off the cuffedness of these things. I know you're all not spending your whole month planning your parlay, except for the people that are. And yeah, of course, you get somewhat limited space to write. So anyway, a very interesting one to start on. I do think a big part of parlay, I kind of said earlier from a business perspective too, is there's got to be enough people that are willing to submit one. You see what I mean? It's not just the cost. Like, I think personally, I believe the thing you get for your full price parlay thing, like the $9 half hour ish, often longer sort of podcast thing, like that's a good rate and everything. One of the problems is that a lot of people just don't want to submit one, which that might be weird to the kind of person submitting them, but I think that is quite common, and I'm sure people will come out of the woodwork to say, like, indeed, that was a common thing. It's hard to respond to comments on these videos, but by the way, if you have anything to say about these specifically, or you want parlay, but you have some anxiety related to this about it, message me on, Discord or Twitter or on a stream or something. I'd be happy to talk about that. I would be very happy to talk about that. I'm not just doing you a favor here. Like, I would love to talk about that. Please do this. This is my life. Okay, we're going to move on. To the second one, which is by DerpyTW. You said, when I do my parlay, it's mostly for one of a few reasons. Firstly, I want some sounding board for a hypothetical thing. What are good self-imposed limitations is partially this. Or I want your Zandy opinion. Ah, yes, trademark. Because it's pretty different than what most of my friends online are like. It's easier to ask someone who's vaguely disconnected from me sometimes. Otherwise, it's basically, well, I like this thing. Time to form a question around it somehow. That's your most common parlay type. I'd say every single parlay I ask has an element of that. Funny enough, I have some slight trouble finding my videos in the string of videos, simply due to the, oh, I definitely could have commissioned that one. Don't need to put this into the parlay, but I feel iPatch Notes is probably the most common person for me to match parlays with. And I am reading this part, having read ahead a little bit, because I think it's interesting. I hope that's okay. Not intentionally, just somewhat similar ideas, Derpy says. While I personally think that True Mr. Foot has ideas that are just way too polished for me to do. Honestly, I enjoy coming up with the questions, though. Finding something I like that is just neat, you guess. Anytime I write a parlay, it's basically utterly incomprehensible just to read, so I have to revise it once or twice to even have a sort of question to work off of. I'd say I didn't manage it for my Skaven parlay. I'd say I succeeded in my What If You Were in a Time Loop parlay. Semi-fail on my Isekai Travel to Remus parlay. First bit of creative writing I did in a while, though, even if it was based on an existing property. And I read this one all the way through. I did scout these before this video, because I think that stream of consciousness is itself a pretty interesting response. So Derpy, I hope you don't mind. You put it in there, so that's very interesting. Kind of a less direct response, but I find it interesting, I guess, that all of you think of your parlay requests as being successes or failures, when I definitely think of it as me succeeding or failing. Like, it's my job to make it good. You're fine. Like, you write a prompt and I don't do something good with it. You could write a terrible prompt, but the kind of value add here is supposed to be that I can just have it be interesting in some way anyway, like provide something anyway. And when a parlay isn't that exciting, it's kind of me, like I sort of want to blame myself there a little bit. Like, it is my job to do that. At the same time, I suppose it's like if you requested a bespoke coffee beverage and at a certain large retail chain that does such things, and it was like really complicated or something, or the order wasn't thought through. And if you described an order for your bespoke coffee beverage and it was really disorganized, and then you got the wrong thing, any reasonable person would partially blame themselves. Sure, I guess. At the same time, I understand that what you're saying, Derpy, is also partially just not necessarily critiquing the parlay. You're just saying when you wrote out those ideas, you did or did not, edit them to a certain extent. And it's hard. It's challenging to not just write a ton. I don't give you all a sort of word limit, which sometimes I think maybe I should. Partially because I think it's pretty intuitive when you see like a giant block of text. You're posting where other people post stuff. So, like, you know if it's really long. And for most people that post really long ones, like Derpy, you have indeed posted like very long parlay before. I think it's really noteworthy that you usually don't. So I know you know what I mean? And if it's like that, then if you can't edit it down, that's fine. You know, you're clearly trying, which is good enough for me. I've found that to be a very interesting little gain from Parlay, is getting to see other people write month to month, and how, again, most people who write really long ones, they don't always write really long ones. So again, like, you're trying. I don't know, like, that it's heartwarming a little bit. That makes me happy. Okay, so to get back to the beginning a little bit more. Yeah, I thought this was interesting too. You said, I want your Zandy opinion because it's pretty different than what most of my friends online are like. I wonder for how many people here this is true. I definitely get a sense from some of you that we, as much as we have a relationship of some sorts, audience and I, parlay people and I, we are not what you'd call friends. We are colleagues, collaborators, members of a cohort, a crew, perhaps you'd say. But it's not the same thing. And I think that the weirdness there is that a lot of the people who would be attracted to these things I'm doing, probably you are people who I like wouldn't mind spending time with. That's just not how it works, you know. Like, if we were to ever do a convention thing or like a meetup, I have occasionally met a few of you in person before. We're talking like less than half a dozen, very few, but it's always been a very pleasant experience. Like, I did not have a bad time. You were always very nice and, I don't know, respectful of me just acting like a person with you all, which is what you get when you have this type of career, A lot of people, their videos are them they putting up this big mask, and so, surprise, like, it's a bit stressful when those people meet you in real life. A lot of the time I see my other fellow creators interacting with people that are fans of them in passing at conventions and stuff, and I would describe the mood or the vibe check as being tense, awkward, strained, because they are not on the same page as the person who's a fan of them. Whereas my entire job is for us to be on the same page. So, yeah, surprise, we, by and large, I think we are. It's certainly a lot better than, as much as any humans are on the same page. But it's better than it would be from just some random stranger, which, I don't know, I feel like that's nice. But that's interesting. I definitely think there's an opposite version of that, where it's like you normally wouldn't hear the input of somebody coming from this perspective, and then you could kind of get it. I would certainly be, if I could do such a thing, I would definitely pay for perspective. That's interesting. You're not really saying that's the whole reason you're doing it, but I do think that's a very interesting, like, maybe I should advertise that. No, because for a lot of people it might be someone more in their wheelhouse. But yeah, that's interesting. I definitely didn't relate as much to the shocking feeling of the viewer, the customer in my case, critiquing their own submission. Like, to me, that's totally my fault. Like, it should be fine if you send me something that's really involved, or you just sent me nonsense. It's like, that's not on you. It's my job to parse through that and figure it out. But I see what you mean. There's still a quality to writing them. I still think you can write a parlay that has positive attributes, if you want to say it that way. But I don't think it's even writing a bad parlay is in some way not bad, is in some way the point, I would argue, that you don't have to worry about it too much. To be absolutely blunt, actually, since we're here, it's not entirely tied to what you're saying, Derpy, but I have always thought that the biggest surprise doing Parlay has been you all put a lot more effort into Parlay than I, like, you don't have to. You can absolutely, and sometimes people don't. Like, there are sometimes trends where we get a month of people doing really short ones that are sort of riffs on a theme. That was, it's dangerous to say this, but the intended purpose. But I suppose those of you who are not doing that, well, you're doing these other things because you want to. You want to push the system in other ways, and we're going to find out moving on from this one, that indeed quite a few of you are going to say your reason is basically just you want to do something different with parlay, which is perfectly fine, of course. I just think it's interesting. I've always been flattered. I don't know what word I want here exactly. Not exactly flattered. No, just impressed, I guess, by all of you. I don't know, putting a lot into parlay. It's fun. Like, I hope you can see how that's very fun for me. Um, Cool. Anyway, we'll move on to Densoro, who says, I originally just joined Parlay so I could tell you about the sale on Nova. This is a tabletop role playing game variant, very lightweight one, before it expired. But along with that TTRPG hipsterdom, I feel like all my parlays have centered around design hot takes. I'm very excited to talk about this particular one. I've spent a lot of time in my head, and it's cool to get outside my echo chamber and talk to someone who won't tell me I'm overthinking because they engage in the same amount of thinking from another direction. Wow. Yeah, that's a whole mood. I sometimes get self-centered and think people just don't do this. But of course, that's not true. There will be people who can relate to my incessant desire to constantly think about everything all the time, and will think, "Oh, that's refreshing." Sure, like I would like to do that. And of course, there is no time. There's never enough time, and so just setting aside some limited time to collaborate that way is refreshing. That's true. I definitely have some parlay I read that I relate more to where that is coming from a mental perspective, or I read the Densora your parlay this month actually. I read and I related very strongly to the way you wrote it in terms of script writing. There was a moment where you kind of stopped yourself and said, if it's not too much of a sidebar, I have this other thing. And I felt like the parlay had been sort of transitioning toward that topic anyway, which I related to extremely. That's like exactly how I write. Most of my video script slash show note things are essentially that. You could totally just do a Zandy Pants video about the thing you submitted. To be blunt, not because it's so polished, but because that is the way I write. Like, I would find it easy to make a video out of that. Which is really interesting that it has attracted some people for whom it's kind of the opposite of what Derpy said. We maybe were coming from a very similar place, and that's still refreshing in its own way. Yes, the design hot takes thing. Okay, so the big thing for me has always been, will this ever evolve into somebody who's asking for parlay having their own channel? And I have it on good authority that it will. I know that some of you stream on your own with some level of success. Again, it's not about numbers, it's whatever that means to you. It's certainly not about numbers for me. And I'm sure some of you run YouTube channels of some kind. I definitely think there's a crew parlay in the future that's plug yourself, show me whatever you make. A lot of you will be graphic designers or just artists online. And I would really enjoy seeing those things. It's a very different relationship to just having a gigantic audience of people that are not really on the same page with you, and they just all say whatever totally unrelated to the thing you're doing thing they do. I can imagine that might be quite stressful, but here, we're a couple layers below the algorithm discoverability, right? Down here in the canopy, with the air plants, it's much cooler. The sun, the light rays of attention-seeking people, they just don't reach quite as far through the canopy, and I think it's easier to allow people to go ahead and talk about your thing a little bit. On the contrary, I actually think most of you need encouraging to do that, not necessarily that you're going to do it on your own. So that would be a fun thing to do sometime. I like the idea that there's a sort of brand to your parlay. That's what I keep smiling about. There's some, like, the design hot take thing is, people have done that for lots of things. But you could easily envision all of those topics being a channel. Not that they're all the same, but there's some pretty specific stuff in your parlay, and it feels coherent. Like, I feel like it's one person asking, oh, right, that other month they asked about this, which I completely get how is related to this other one you're asking, and it goes from there, which is fun. Like, that's just very satisfying. I don't have a ton to say about this one. I just, yep. I guess maybe more what I was thinking when I started doing Parlay too. Like people would do their own little series of videos, or it's a little bit like the maybe the closest thing is that service where you can. There's lots of these where you can pay people to just voice a thing that you want written, or maybe even add face cam to a thing. These are pretty often used in meme culture, where people will commission someone to. I'm sure you've seen a some common meme where there was clearly a voice actor or just like a paid actor's face saying something from like an anime or something that they clearly didn't know the context for, but they were paid on a website like that to just say it and read it with a certain type of voice, I guess. And it comes out hilarious because if you have the context of when that thing is said in the show or whatever, then it's very funny to hear someone say it, not with the wrong mood, but not inflected the way it is in the show, which I like, that's fun. I guess that is, this is a much more verbally involved version of that. I guess that's the closest thing I can think of to, you can basically make your own videos. Oh, just as a sidebar, the struggle to explain to people what is this, I think the closest two things are, it's kind of like when you pay someone to do voice acting, except you just give me a prompt and I go for a while. It's longer than that would usually be, I guess. Or the other thing I do is you get like a custom podcast for your money, and you give me the prompt and then I respond to it. That, I guess, but it's not. It's pretty far away from both of those things. I don't know. So I'll move on. But that one really made me smile. This is iPatch Notes. The response author identifies two key motivations behind parlay requests. Oh, it's already iPatch Notes, First is that they aspire to be a full-fledged content creator one day. Well, there you go. It's almost like I read ahead in the responses. Parlay is a partial realization of that goal. Related is effectively clapping someone on the shoulders and getting a reply when they cannot turn away. Oh boy. A classic strategy in their workplace, iPatch Notes' workplace, and generally executed in good faith. Just by the way, all joking aside, I agree. You're not holding me at gunpoint asking me to. I can always say no to the parlay requests, but I don't want to. iPatch Notes seeks to leverage Parlay as a natural platform to compare and contrast ideas relative to social media sites and forums that do not guarantee a response. Yes, it is challenging when you're not in person to find a good balance of back and forth where, if you talk in a comment section or some social media platform, you're not guaranteed a response, but it's free, and the responses would be quite unweighted. There is a way in which this is more weighted because I am technically getting paid, as little as $1 in this case, but still technically getting paid to respond. It's just that I'm not getting paid to say anything in particular, and so I think that works very well. The fact that it isn't, even if you ask a parlay that is sort of a question with a single answer, like if it were to be, this will come up later, a math problem, the service that Parlay is just isn't really me giving you information. It's just me responding however. And so that takes a lot of weight off of the exchange, is that I'm not being paid to say anything in particular, just to say something. And if you knew me in real life, you would know that I am generally quite willing to talk about something like this. So it's not as if it's something I'm going out of my way to do. Really, the if you don't mind me co-opting this to say for a second, the real reason it needs to be paid is just because there would be too many otherwise. And I need to make a living, but it's not as if you're paying me to go out of my way to then think about a thing for a long time. Like, no, I would have anyway, just maybe not this thing. And I would also have no house. So that point of organization is noteworthy, I think, that it works well to be able to clap me on the shoulder and get a response when I cannot turn away, because I don't want to, I have every intention of sticking around. I'm excited when I see a submission. Anyway, the full-fledged creator thing. Yes. So this one is very interesting to me, because the thing to dig into is, what is the what's the word? The timeline, I guess, for that. You know, what are the steps? This is so dangerous, but I would almost want to make a video saying, let's say some of you have had full several years of Parley. What is the on ramp to doing a thing on your own, basically? I've thought a lot about this lately because a lot of the things that I think you really should do before starting, I didn't feel like I should have done before starting until having done the thing for much longer than just a year or two, like 5 years. And then I got to a point and thought, ooh, you should really just not do this at all until you've done this thing, for example. Some of them are very stupid things. I know after saying something like that, you want me to give you some examples. Some of them are very stupid things that it should have just been obvious to me. I'm just very stupid sometimes. And these are things like your email account, where you would collaborate with other people. I did some consulting work recently. And like, that's great and everything. It was a good time for me. They were pretty reasonable about the time frame. It was good pay, etc. It worked out and all. At the same time, I don't have that email thing prepared where there's just a thing that says, hey, I'm on vacation. You know, I'll get back to you when I get back to you, right? Which, you know, if you need to go on vacation or you need to take a break to rest and you don't have that, you know, that's hard. Two things as simple as getting transitions hooked up together in OBS. How this works, basically, the recording software I use. You see how when I put the text on the screen, there is a way it appears. It doesn't just pop in. It's not a jump cut. There's a type of transition. Getting that set so that different connections of scenes, so when I go from this scene to this scene or this scene to that scene, a different scene, it does a different transition. That is simple. But in practice, if you certainly streaming, I would say that's a fairly big deal. Like, there are some very visually impactful things you can do that you can't really do if you don't have that thing. And OBS, the version I use, two different versions. The version I use for recording just updated recently, and I now cannot find that feature, which it sounds very minor, but I use that every single time I make something. Like, I really, really need that feature. That's on the level of if they decide to update and change where that is, everything needs to stop while I go find where that is. And having a list, basically, of stuff like that. This might seem like a huge tangent, but it totally isn't. Of the things that you'd want to have done, want to know about and have sorted, and then also which ones you need to keep an eye on. You know, what if it changes? Which I guess is all of them, but certainly some more than others, would be very, very valuable. A sort of creator build from me, if you will. I don't think there's any point in acting like I'm not obviously going to make a video about that at some point. I just feel like this now isn't the time, because there are quite a few outstanding things that I'm actively working on already. And once that stuff is done, I would be very happy to kind of present a package like that. This then is interesting. Parley, to circle back around finally, is interesting because the only problem with doing that is that I think from a creative perspective, you should really just start. But from every other perspective, you should not start. I would do all this other stuff first. Common advice for creating a channel is to just go, because no matter how long you wait, it won't be perfect, or if you're a certain kind of person, you won't think it's good. So there's no point in doing that. You're not going to start with this polished thing. You will not. A lot of people, you can see the way their channel's set up, they thought they were starting with a very polished thing, but it, compared to what they ended up doing eventually, the thing they did initially was not terrible or anything. It's still good, but vastly inferior to the thing they ended up doing. You just want to get to that thing as soon as possible. You don't absolutely need to make videos to do that. But I mean, so there's a way in which being able to start basically making videos or voicing out ideas without actually beginning running a channel is interesting. Like that's a obviously you could just have it be a separate channel or something, but having it be someone else's channel is a very weird, unique space to arrive in. And I bet Jonas and we've talked a little bit about this previously. I'm quite interested to see where that goes. By the way, again, this is not you self-plugging, which even if it was is fine. Like you did pay to support what I'm doing, so that would be fine anyway. But just by the way, yeah, I would love to help if you need help with any of this stuff. I hope it goes without saying. I would obviously be happy to talk about any of these things. Even something I just mentioned as an example, you want more details, like it would be no problem. Like I'm happy to help. As far as I'm concerned, also, your success would be good for me too, even though it would be fairly likely that the person would consider stop buying Parley. But I think that's fine. I like it has other benefits. A rising tide lifts all boats, all that jazz. So anyway, a bit more down to earth about this thing, but I think that topic is quite interesting. Obviously, the elephant in the room is you can kind of make your own videos as you go. And what if you then just did make your own videos? What is the transition period? There's on ramp. What is the term I'm trying to think of for that thing? But you basically get it. What is the transition like between this and that? Again, I don't know. Somehow some term is evading me here, but that thing was really of interest to me. But yeah, being able to compare a little bit, put our heads together. Something you've done quite often, iPatch Notes, is bring up topics that were on a stream and highlight them a bit more. That's a pretty common type of parlay in general, actually, as much as there even are common types of common in parlay means 5% of parlay is this, right? But at the same time, it's not like you're the only person who does that. Yeah, having a place to highlight something that you thought was significant in a discussion, but maybe at the time I didn't have much to say about, or I talked about it a little bit, but you felt like it warranted more discussion. Again, I think the upshot is that I'm a kind of person who's good for doing this because I almost invariably agree that it's worth talking about more. So you clapping me on the shoulder and saying, no, but let's talk about this really specific thing. I'm not going to say, oh, but there really is nothing to say, though. There's very few topics for which I would say that. It'd be fun some month to ask you all to do maybe a crew parlay that was try to ask me something like that. Like ask me something where you think I will have very little to say. Remember, I can always just talk about literally anything, but of course, in good faith, I'd try to relate it to the thing that's being said. Because I think that's interesting. There's definitely an element of pressure, I guess. And I've had a lot of you be very courteous in the past about, you don't have to talk about this if you don't want to. I'm kind of forcing you to talk about this thing, but sort of not. The open-endedness of parlay is intended to give you a little freedom to just not worry about it that much. So anyway, I guess I had a lot of stuff all over the place to say about this one, but the idea of people making their own, thing, it is interesting to me. It might even be reasonable to have some kind of event. Man, it would have to be like a year, wouldn't it? Where you do 12 parlay over the course of a year, and then they're sort of as a set, and people could maybe even review them, and you could get feedback. One very valuable thing about doing this general type of career for a living, where you have the basically crowdsourced supported income, is that crowd tends to be amenable to you asking them questions about stuff, and you can get a lot of responses toward things. You get your own little sort of survey group. I think for a lot of folks, it doesn't matter that much because their audience isn't focused enough for that to be very focused data, but their audience is also not literally anyone. It is still a little focused, which is kind of the worst of both worlds. And the upshot is they do get a large data set for way less money, by the way, than you would normally get for that information. So when you all respond to my questions, I am quite thankful. That is a valuable thing that has some measurable value. That it's a valuable thing with some measurable value. It's quite tangible. That is a useful thing. So thank you. At the same time, I do feel like this is a more focused community, especially again down in the canopy. The even more focused parlay that is people watching parlay, the even more focused community. That's my language. And so getting feedback from those people could be an interesting, fun, valuable thing. Probably for very few people, but that's fine. I guess it would just be you would do your parlay for a year. It might be a thing where I would allow, like, you can submit them all at once or whenever you want for a cheaper price, and maybe you can do more. You have to have parlay already, but then I'll say you could pay $75 and get an extra parlay for the whole year, and they're all, they just all have to be on a theme, and people give you feedback as well. That could be fun. Again, I'm not sure anybody other than maybe iPatch Notes and a few other people would want this, but if you do, we could talk about that. It would be cool. And of course, I'm not going to do anything to stop you from using your own existing parlay that way if you want. I could maybe help more. That's all. Cool. To the last one, which is from True Mr. Foot. The true G, Mr. F to the double OT. I read that a lot of times before starting this, trying to think about, it's one of those things you read it and think, but that's wrong, but it's not. Anyway, okay, so the final one. Calling back to quite a few of what we've talked about before. Out of the parlay that I like looking back on, I have three main motivations for requesting them, and I will do all three of them in one form. By the way, notice the oddness of asking Mr. Foot this question. True Mr. Foot, a person who has done a parlay about their different types of parlay. It was later revealed that this entire crew parlay was Mr. Foot's suggestion. That's true. So Mr. Food, thank you for the idea. It's been very interesting. I hope it hasn't been overly focused on my business perspective on the subject. I just think that is quite interesting. I hope that if you're here, like, by the way, it's mostly people who are already paying for the things. So I'm not intending to advertise necessarily. I think it's interesting. I put a lot of effort into this thing I made. I think the details are fascinating, and you all seem to as well. You have definitely very interesting ways to use this. Anyway, it's obviously going to be a long response because Mr. Food has literally already requested a parlay that was this topic and also requested this crew parlay. So will there be a lot of text? Obviously so. I'm gonna stop after each one. Mr. Foot says, my least favorite of these three is suggesting a discussion topic I've philosophized on in the past. Sometimes it's a specific story, like with how fish is made. Sometimes it's something silly, like the backwards bending limbs. And it can be some abstract topics, like the one about things being profound. I usually have some of my own thoughts going on into these requests, but it's always nice to hear someone else's take on the topic before you get lost in your own thoughts. This usually works well with your whole personality/approach. They're easy to make, and they become a fallback whenever I don't have a better idea. Yeah, again, these are often the type of question I guess I initially envisioned when I started doing Parlay however long ago, that it would just be people pitching a thing that was on their mind, and then I would also compute that thing. And you're right that it is very natural for me. I would say this is the most common type of parlay where I'm asked a question and I've already thought quite a lot about that topic. It seems to be out of nowhere, but I just happen to have already gotten there. A great joy of being a person who has a lot of time to think in life is finding how other people have gotten to the same point in the discussion or the topic, and noticing those people in the world, or maybe a thing they've made, and something comes up that subtly, it's either your pattern recognition or it's that person having thought of the same thing. You notice people who got to the same point in the thought process as you. It is not so different, the path each of us is walking when thinking about this stuff, and I just find that very satisfying and fun. I really don't relate very strongly to people who want a community, but it's often in a very shallow way. They want to be part of a group or a club, but they don't really care much about actually having much in common with those people. It's enough for there to just be a group. Often the group is even more arbitrary. I'm very happy if folks have had a positive experience of this, but a common example would be church communities. These are often people who there might be something good they have in common, which is that they believe in treating your fellow person well, etc. Church is not evil or something, but I do think it can be indirectly negative how those groups of people are giving the person a community, but one that doesn't have much to do with them personally. It really de-emphasizes you as a person. At least that's how I have felt in the past. There are exceptions. Some types of Unitarian Universalist churches are arguably about you. So maybe I should have attended one of those as a child, but that's not to generalize, just to double down on this point, just to say that I think many, many places that you see people congregate in a group, they are finding a seemingly shared thing, but it is only the most basic common ground. And I have always found that extremely frustrating, very annoying, that my desire for people I feel like I'm really on the same page with is undercut by people demanding so little of being on the same page. I am, how you say, an asshole about this topic because I think it's bad. I think it causes people to end up in a group of people that influence them in a direction they never really intended, or to live up to standards or assume certain standards that person never really wanted, never really signed up for, but they just didn't try hard enough to find people that there's any reason at all to spend time with, basically. Snarky, snark. I'll get back to the parlay, but I do feel it's relevant because one thing I like about those types of parlay is they feel quite familiar to me. It's kind of reassuring, or I would say mentally therapeutic even, because it feels like I'm really on the same page with that way of thinking. It's not perfect. People never fully truly understand each other, sure, but I do feel I can, for a very seldom time in my life, I can for once relate to something someone else is saying. I hardly ever relate to media or other people. That's just been my experience. And so it's very refreshing when I get those. I'm just saying I like that kind of parlay. There's not a lot else to say. You're right. It is often pretty straightforward. What's happening is also pretty straightforward. Again, it's maybe the obvious way to use parlay, but I still find it quite meaningful for that extremely highfalutin reason. My second favorite of these types of parlay, remember, Mr. Foot says it's the experimental ones. I try to keep things fresh by pushing the limits of what parlay can be. You've definitely done this among the most of a lot of people. This is something that can make for an amazing parlay, or work for a one-off, or fail horrendously. Examples of these are me trying out a question that can only have one answer, a math problem in drift frame math. This was vaguely interesting, but not something I'd like to repeat. Again, I just don't know if there's a single answer. And so you could ask a question with one answer, but I won't have it. Probably anyway. On the complete opposite end of the spectrum, we have rejected parlay, which is my ingenious way of turning a handful of mediocre odd requests into one good request. Why you? I pay you $10 per month to create a video of my choosing, and there's nothing you can do about it but act out my weird ideas. Again, you're not holding me at gunpoint here. I could say no and refund you. I love that you're not the only person to have said it this way. Like the whole, well, good luck with that. Like, I don't know. Like, it's not, there's no duress here. I can't prevent myself from smiling in what looks like a nervous way. But really, like, it's not, it's fine. I often like those, and it's healthy for me because I'm a person who originally really beat myself up or overly criticized myself for any minor flaw or something not being perfect, when I often turn around and in a different mood am the kind of person who will say, why do other people expect, you to have it all together? I'll give you an example. Again, like some parlay I've recorded in the past. I finish it and I think, but this is just unorganized, even for, it's not even meant to be organized. I need to do it again. This is not, good enough or whatever. And sometimes it isn't, and I redo it. But a good amount of the time, in the past anyway, was it reasonable for it to be more organized? Like, it's okay. It's an experiment. It is okay. And I'm the kind of person who beats myself up about that, even when in the same day, later on, I called the doctor because I need to set up a doctor thing. And the way that you are expected to just know the sort of fine mechanics of the best one is in the United States when you're looking for doctors that are taking new patients or dentists that are taking new patients, they will say, well, we can't do the new patient thing with you because you need to go ask your insurance for the some number. But if you call your insurance, they will also say, like, no, you need to call them. There is a better order to do it in, but one of the calls needs to be partially a waste of time. And both parties treat you like you're wasting their time unnecessarily, and you should just go waste the other party's time. And I'm the type of person who gets furious about this. It makes me feel like you're making me feel inadequate or like I don't know what I'm supposed to be doing when the thing I am meant to be doing is stupid. Like, it just is bad anyway. Like, the good version isn't good. Who cares if I don't know what's going on, why are you treating me like I'm not doing the right thing? Like, first of all, how would I know? And second of all, the system is garbage anyway. So anyway, pushing my feelings down again, just to say that I'm definitely the kind of person who has aggressively criticize myself for things that there's no good reason to know how to do this. It's fine. Or even just my work overall. Like, I invented this version of this career. It's not modeled on someone else. I am bushwhacking this way of doing this thing. It's not like nobody else does something similar, but that I don't have a guide. I wasn't taught to do this. I made it up. I figured it out as I went along. So if something doesn't go right, I mean, come on, why would it? It's exciting that it even is working a little bit. So what I'm saying is that this type of parlay that's an experiment has been good practice for me, all in all, to get me to be less of a person who expects something out of touch with the parameters, like something that's unreasonable given the situation. I was a person who once did that a lot, and parlay has been not a small amount of me not doing that. It's meant to be a thing in my life that makes me come out better, and I do think that has contributed a lot. So these ones that are pushing it, obviously within reason, I think that's good. When there's something, it might just seem like an odd parlay. It's not asking me to do, too much for a parlay or something. It's just something a bit different. That is fine. Like, I don't think that's bad. Moving on to the final one and the end of the video. My favorite, Mr. Fruit says, type of parlay is a genuine question that I want answers to. These can be questions that I want to either ask you specifically, like audience relationships. That was a good one. Or questions that my mind keeps drifting off to, like the least scary thing or weird groceries. These are very different to the other categories if the goal of the first is to get some discussion and the second is about pushing the boundaries of the format. This is all about the answer you arrive at. Ah, yes, my desire for there to be an answer to everything. I often feel like in human discussion in general, it falls apart at the end. There's a tendency to sit down with a close friend or a partner maybe and have a discussion that some progress is perhaps made, but it needs to be kind of collected. It needs to be gathered at the end, and it isn't. Generally, those conversations, especially with a partner, stereotypically end in someone storming off or getting mad, or people getting tired and just sort of petering out the discussion, just kind of drifts off and ends. And that's a shame, because in that moment, if you could pull through and gather all the information together, I certainly think that is often a moment where you learned the most. There's a nugget to be gathered there, if only you keep sifting a little bit more. And that can definitely be exhausting if you're not ready for it. I would recommend, if you were in a relationship, to really get that process down somehow and be ready to give up when it's reasonable to give up. You can't always get the nugget, but it's not going to do damage to your relationship with someone just to get the damn nugget. At the same time, I do feel like that's valuable. And so parlay has this weird thing where I've often thought about allowing the parlay requester to add parameters of some kind, but it's always been that it felt superfluous in the end, or you would just know to add those. I think the biggest one is, should I let you check a box or something that says, I do want an answer. You know what I mean? Like, I don't just want discussion, I want an answer. I think the catch is that I want an answer. So even if you ask a discussion topic and you don't want an answer specifically, I do. So I sort of always try to include one. I've said in a previous parlay that one of my views about art is that what defines art to me is that it does something. That it enacts something. And so there's no line, but things that I would agree are more art are creative expression, something that is, I guess, personal, you could say, and which does something. Specific is maybe better than personal. Very specific thing, a more unique or personal thing, which enacts something. Again, what it could enact would be getting emotions out of the viewer, or shocking them, or making them think about something, or anything really. But there are, for example, some types of what people usually call art, which I am critical of, not because I do or don't like them, but because I argue they just don't do anything for most people. If they're inaccessible, that's basically where I'm going with this. I would argue that that type of art is less arty, almost simply because it's not anything for most people. And I don't think it's some higher thing for the people that do appreciate it. I feel like being less accessible is just, you just do less. You are communicating less. You could almost go as far as to say that the art is communication, and it just doesn't communicate as much. It's being particular. It's demanding that the audience be someone very specific. That's not necessarily bad communication, but I do think it's bad art. And I feel like people really overly rely on an archetype of art that is from a time when way less people read, and people read similar things. And so referencing those few things that indeed most of the people that even could read the thing you wrote had read was common. But that wasn't good because being exclusive was magically good back then. It's because it wasn't as exclusive. Reading was more exclusive. But if you weren't going to change the world about that, the people who could read the thing you were writing, were more on the same page. Whereas nowadays, that's really not true at all. And I feel like people have kind of not grown out of that very adolescent stage of art referencing itself being this masturbatory exercise. I cannot contain myself with any opportunity to talk about how much I hate that. This is something I value very highly, is that if I make this thing for you and it's meant to be entertainment, which is, you could say, some weird form of art, I have a priority that it do something, that it enact something. You've seen throughout this parlay that I had a few moments where I said, oh, because we had this thought, maybe I could then do this thing. Like, here's an actionable thing about that. And I love that. That is my habit as a person. It can be problematic. You can go too far with anything. But as with a lot of these things about me, I think I've gone too far, but other people don't go far enough, and it's better to do this than that. I would rather go too far and pare it back, rather than being a person who lives in a way where they're not focused on anything being actionable, is, I guess, how I feel other people live their life that I'm so critical of. Too much is still very bad, but I think it's not as bad as too little. If you must go to an extreme and then correct toward the middle, it's better to go to this extreme, is what I think. There's your unsolicited advice for the day. That's also a thing that's in Parley a lot, completely unsolicited advice, which I am only a middling source for. Like, you maybe shouldn't take that advice. It's not terrible. It's not great. That's another staple of Parley. We could do another one that's what is in every Parley. What are things that are, what makes a Parley? What is Parley? So we have, a bunch of them for the next 3 months from this one. Good work, folks. And thanks for submitting these. The only thing I have to say before we go is that if you support me for any amount of money on any platform, if you're a Twitch Prime sub or you have Twitch Prime and want to sub, if you pay for Twitch like a tier 1 sub, if you're a YouTube member, if you're a patron, for any amount of money, $1 is fine. You have this, so please use it. I like these. You're not overloading me. It's fun. There'll be an announcement video next month for what topic there is. That'll let you know that there's a form you can submit to. You can submit to it. In a week or two after you submit, I'll make these videos. So that's how it works. You should automatically get access to my Discord server just by supporting me on those platforms. Just make sure to connect your account on Discord with that platform. Looking forward to it. See you all next month.